In this world, to make ends meet, even zombies have to take up special professions. The man's name is Philip. Initially, he and Amy had an accidental encounter after a night of drinking, but at that time, Rorton Village did not accept PDS sufferers. To keep his job, Philip abandoned Amy, and soon after, Amy left Rorton Village. It was then Philip realized the kind of feeling he was obsessed with, so he became a regular at this studio. Until Philip saw Amy again at the station, the memories of that night flooded back. He took the opportunity of arranging community service to keep Amy close by, having her do light tasks. Philip hoped to regain her favor, but Amy was not impressed. She was no longer the naive woman she used to be. So, a gloomy Philip returned to the studio, unaware that the lady next door had recorded his every move. Meanwhile, Maxine was holding a village meeting, stating her intention to re-establish a guard team to maintain order, and she hoped the villagers would actively speak up and offer suggestions. At this moment, a lady asked what to do about the PDS studio, mentioning that it kept their men from coming home all night. This revelation shocked Maxine. She couldn't believe such a studio existed here. She stated, "We once prided ourselves on our authenticity, recognized nationwide, a model for others in society. Now, the living and the dead have come into close contact. Is this a moral decay or a distortion of human nature? Tonight, we shall destroy this den of evil." Maxine's words were met with applause from the villagers. Then Sylvia spoke up, interrupting Maxine, outright saying Maxine was full of lies, mentioning her son Henry had been missing for a long time with no one paying attention. This caused the villagers to question Maxine.
Devote our resources to searching for someone who has gone missing of his own volition.
That's more of it. More lies spread against him. What if it were your child you didn't know were alive or dead, and when you ask for help, people just turn their backs, don't even ask after him or mention his name, just carry on like he were never here.
At that moment, in the PDS studio, Philip was woken up by a staff member, only then realizing he had missed the village meeting. But as soon as he stepped out, he was spat on the face by the next door lady, who declared she would tell everyone how disgusting he was. Frightened, Philip could only flee in panic, and by the time he reached the venue, the meeting had already ended. He asked Maxine if she had agreed to search for Henry, as he had promised Sylvia to bring up the matter at the meeting to seek help from everyone. But Maxine, harboring guilt, merely said that Henry's case, being trivial, would only distract everyone, asserting that the most important task was to deal with the PDS studio. If the boundary between the living and the PDS is broken, the consequences will be unimaginable. Actually, Maxine wanted to use this opportunity to consolidate her position. On the other hand, Kieran wanted to invite Simon to a family gathering, only to find Simon cultivating followers for the undead prophet. Simon was instilling in the PDS sufferers the unfair treatment from humans, urging them to shed their disguises, be their true selves, and share their resurrection stories. This greatly displeased Kieran, who felt the village was filled with brainwashed individuals. He wished to interact with Simon like any normal person. Seeing Kieran about to leave, Simon hastily stated he would do anything for him. Previously, Simon's heart was only filled with faith, but now, he had Kieran. For Kieran, Simon dressed up to look normal. Then, the two of them went to Kieran's house. Not long after they sat down, Jem arrived with Gary to join the gathering. Because they had all had conflicts before, the atmosphere was somewhat awkward. Simon proposed that everyone should stay calm here. However, during the conversation, Gary inappropriately brought up his past experiences of hunting zombies. His vivid descriptions made the atmosphere awkward again.
Is that what you did in the war, is it? Kill people?
Leave it.
No, I won't. I killed people too. Funny story of my own, actually. I rose from the dead.
Kieran shared his resurrection story, waking up in darkness, in a tight, pitch-black space, thinking he had been buried alive. He could only desperately pound on the coffin lid until the soil poured in, and he crawled out of the grave. Kieran's story caught Simon's attention. At that moment, Steve suddenly slammed the table, interrupting Kieran. He didn't want to hear such painful memories of his son, but Kieran felt that his father was favoring Gary. Why could Gary speak his mind when he couldn't? Afterward, Kieran left with Simon. At that moment, Kieran felt malice from everyone. He decided to be his true self again, shedding his disguise. Then Kieran used a handkerchief to wipe off the foundation from Simon's face. Perhaps this man was the only one who truly cared for him. On the other side, Maxine took out a videotape, which showed Philip going to the PDS studio. Maxine said she could help Philip conceal this, provided that Philip would join her in persuading Sylvia to give up searching for her son. Afterwards, Philip could continue working here. However, when Philip met Sylvia, the kind-hearted him chose to tell the truth. Maxine had no intention of looking for Henry and was just making excuses with lies. Meanwhile, outside the studio, villagers had gathered, displaying protest banners. Maxine was loudly stirring up public outrage. Seeing that the mood was right, she had Gary lead a team to block the guests and staff inside, then dragged them out to publicly shame them. At that moment, Philip also arrived. He took the megaphone from Maxine's hand.
I think we should stop this. I think we should all stop pretending. People aren't pure. We're not good any more than they're evil or they're inhuman. Maybe we only have to pretend they're bad because we have to pretend we're good. But if we could just accept our real selves and live with who we really are and love ourselves, and maybe we could accept and live with and love.
But his words only stirred up the villagers' emotions further, drawing Maxine's scoffs. Seeing them ignore him, Philip turned and walked into the queue behind him, choosing to face his own mistakes. All this was witnessed by Amy, who then found the disheartened Philip. With a kind-hearted joke, Amy tried to offer him guidance.
I went to one sex worker.
One? What's one?
Because she reminded me of someone.
Who's counting?
Because I do like some people with PDS. Very few. You, in fact.
At that moment, snowflakes began to fall, and Maxine went to the cemetery in the village. In the distance, inside a phone booth,
You should see him. He's beautiful.
Simon was assigned to Rorton village by the undead prophet to revive the zombie community and find the original deceased. He turned the local PDS into followers and even found the love of his life. But at yesterday's gathering, Simon realized Kieran was the one he had been desperately searching for, and he immediately reported this to the undead prophet. This led to the scene at the beginning. Then a man handed a package to Simon. After the man left, Simon paced the room uneasily. Simon hadn't expected that the requirement to trigger a second resurrection was to kill his loved one. Torn between faith and love, Simon didn't know how to choose, and his hesitation plunged him into memories. He woke up from darkness, vaguely seeing two figures in front of him. He found himself bound to a metal frame, surrounded only by corpses covered with white cloths and confined zombies. His movements quickly caught the attention of those in front. Simon was the first zombie in the world to regain humanity. His appearance thrilled the researchers. John told Simon they were researching a drug that could restore the humanity of zombies. But among countless subjects, only Simon had reacted. To end the war, they needed Simon to cooperate with them for more experiments. Simon agreed to their demands, hoping to see his family again with a normal appearance. From then on, Simon underwent experiments day after day, gradually achieving results. More zombies began to regain their humanity, providing them with more subjects for experiments. However, an accident occurred during one experiment, plunging the room into darkness, and Simon found it eerily quiet around him. Suddenly, a red light came on.
Hello?
You were the first and the last. You were the one that liveth and was dead, and behold, you are alive forevermore.
Who's that?
You are what's meant to be.
What's happening? What's happening?
They'll lie into you, Simon. They'll live and they'll lie into you. They'll say anything to survive. Don't trust them.
When the light came on again, it turned out to be Simon's fantasy. Soon after, Simon returned to his residence, where the locked-up Julian asked why he allowed them to manipulate him like a puppet. Simon responded that they just wanted to cure him.
Way better than that. We are the first and the last, and behold, we are alive forevermore.
You heard him too.
Believe him, Simon.
Time passed, and John found Simon again, arranging for him to meet his family. But Simon didn't want to meet his parents looking like this, accusing them of promising not to let his parents know of his existence until he was normal. John just said it was all just an experiment and left. Simon had no choice but to wear contact lenses and apply foundation, but the meeting wasn't as emotional or warm as he imagined. Simon asked why his mother hadn't come, which surprised his father, Ian.
You don't remember?
What'd I do?
I can't do this.
Dad! Dad! Dad, what did I do?
This scene was observed by a group of people upstairs. Later, they conducted further experiments on Simon.
See now, the living have nothing to offer you but lies. They're desperate men with desperate schemes, and you do not belong with them. You belong with your own kind. Only then will you find salvation. Only then will you find peace.
Simon heard the voice of the apocalypse again. After a long time, Ian finally accepted Simon, and the two returned home together. Simon's room was unchanged, where he saw photos of his mother and himself.
Dad, what happened to Mum? I didn't mean to.
Alright.
I just want to say that
I said alright, Simon.
His father's attitude plunged him into deep guilt, and at that moment Ian looked at the empty pillow. He still couldn't forgive Simon. He stormed into Simon's room.
Don't deserve to look at her. I want you out of this house. Get out!
Therefore, Simon ended up homeless, feeling at that moment as if he had been abandoned, with the vast world having no place for him. Eventually, Simon arrived at a phone booth and took out a message left by Julian.
Hello, it's Simon. I'm ready to follow.
When Simon arrived at the designated place, the man led him inside. Thus, Simon became one of the 12 apostles, and the man was the later undead prophet. As the memories ended, Simon opened the package in his hand, the sharp knife inside firming up a certain resolve. On the other side, Kieran appeared before his parents without disguise, choosing to fight against the injustices after what happened at the gathering yesterday. His sudden change was hard for his family to accept. At that moment, Dean suddenly arrived and took Kieran away without explanation. It turned out that recently, Simon's followers, to implement his teachings, broke into the village clinic and released wild zombies kept in cages. The alarm quickly drew Denise, who thought it was a false alarm due to old equipment, and was caught off guard and eaten by zombies. Because Kieran and Simon had visited the clinic together, the village committee directly blamed them for releasing the zombies. Kieran explained that they only went to the clinic for volunteer work and never returned there, but the villagers in front of him wouldn't listen, saying that if Kieran admitted guilt, he could be put on probation and stay at home. Otherwise, he would be sent back to the research institute. Kieran knew that a charge could be fabricated if desired. However, driven by Maxine, the village had already harbored great hostility towards PDS, and Kieran's resistance was seen as a zombie's instinct. Then, Kieran was sent home and placed under house arrest by Dean, with villagers gathering in front of his house, hurling insults. Upon learning that he might be sent back to the institute, Kieran's parents urged him to just admit guilt. Kieran couldn't understand why he should take responsibility for something he hadn't done. Facing such injustice, why wouldn't his parents defend him? Was it just because he was PDS, and they were living? At that moment, Kieran truly embraced Simon's theories, so he sneakily left and went to Simon's residence, but Simon wasn't home. However, Kieran accidentally found Simon's blue oblivion on the table. On the other side, Gary found Maxine. It turned out he had followed Simon to that motel. While the man was arguing with someone else, Gary took the opportunity to steal the undead prophet's plans from his bag. Maxine finally understood the key to the second resurrection. As she pondered who the first resurrected was, Sandra invited her to watch TV. Sandra, an avid fan of Hard Graft, had never missed an episode update, but Connie spoiled the content of the finale for her. This caused Sandra's pent-up anger to explode, saying, "Ever since I saw you crawl out of your grave, you've been tormenting me constantly." Maxine instantly realized Sandra was a witness to the resurrection that evening, feeling as if everything was fated. Then they went to the room to identify the first person to be resurrected.
You're sure? That's the first person you saw rise from their grave?
Amy had left this world due to leukemia years ago, but the resurrection of the deceased brought her back, turning into a zombie feeding on humans. Fortunately, government-developed medication restored her humanity. By the time Amy returned to her hometown, her family had long gone, but she was lucky to meet Kieran at the cemetery. However, her happiness was short-lived. Amy, being unconventional, angered Rorton village, and she was warned by villagers who broke into her home. This saddened Amy. Was being PDS a reason to face such discrimination? Thus, Amy decided to join the resurrection commune created by the undead prophet. There, without discrimination or disdainful looks, she finally found a reason to live, until the undead prophet arranged for her and Simon to return to Rorton village. Upon her return, Amy's first act was to find Kieran and share her experiences in the commune over the years, introducing him to Simon, whom she considered her boyfriend. However, Amy was unaware of the purpose of her return to Rorton Village. She was simply following Simon's arrangements. Amy thought she could live peacefully with her best friend and the person she loved the most. However, during an injection, Amy had a severe stress reaction. Her right hand uncontrollably trembled, even searching for food in the kitchen early in the morning, suddenly forgetting she no longer needed to eat. The abnormalities led her to consult a doctor. The doctor suggested she might have developed antibodies to the current medication, then gave her the latest upgraded medicine. However, when Amy returned home, she happened to catch Kieran and Simon kissing at the door, striking her like lightning. She never imagined the two people she loved the most were together. The disheartened Amy went to her family's grave. Meanwhile, villagers were protesting against the PDS studio nearby. Philip's defense of PDS was overheard by her, suddenly making Amy think maybe this man wasn't as bad as she thought. She found Philip alone. Amy intended to comfort the man who had just been hit hard, but at that moment, Philip suddenly confessed his feelings. The snow got heavier and heavier, and they spent an unforgettable night together. Until the next day, Amy injected the new medication, but this time it caused her to faint. After waking up, Amy remembered a flyer she had received not long ago. The content on the flyer made her determined. She arranged to meet Philip in a tent, causing Philip to wear an excited smile. Unexpectedly, Amy asked Philip if he had ever personally ended a zombie's life, then handed him a pair of handcuffs to lock her up and a screwdriver to kill her. How could Philip possibly agree to such a request? However, an excited Amy revealed she had developed antibodies to the medication and would soon turn back into a zombie. She didn't want to relive the life of a walking corpse, nor did she want to hurt her friends because of it. Philip suggested there might be a solution at the doctor's, but Amy was now having adverse reactions to the latest medication. In the end, Philip painfully raised the screwdriver.
No, Philip! Wait. My face is wet. My face is wet.
So?
I can feel the rain.
Amy, who had been dead for many years, suddenly felt alive again. After an indescribable night, the chill of the morning excited them both, with Amy genuinely feeling everything in the world again. However, she was still worried that her changes might attract in-depth analysis from the Institute. So, they decided to keep this a secret and start a new life somewhere no one knew them. And this day happened to be December 12th, the day the undead prophet intended to sacrifice the first resurrected. Also the day Rorton Village held its traditional boundary parade. The story's final chapter was about to unfold. At this time, Simon and his followers donned their death clothes, ready to fulfill their mission. Meanwhile, Gary found Maxine, declaring he would solve the problem at its root to prevent a second resurrection, but Maxine unusually refused Gary's action. But Gary still broke into Simon's residence alone, only to find it empty except for a message left on the wall. So, Gary went directly to Kieran, believing that since Kieran and Simon were friends, he must know their next plan. Gary declared he wouldn't let Simon ruin the hard-earned status quo. However, Kieran didn't know their plan, so Gary dragged him into the car. And this scene was precisely discovered by Simon, who arrived. As the clock neared 12, Simon's followers gathered in the cemetery, murmuring the resurrection chant. At this moment, the boundary parade procession also arrived, and the followers confronted them with blue oblivion in hand. At this time, Gary brought Kieran near the cemetery, forcefully stuffing the blue oblivion he found on Kieran into his mouth. Gary wanted Kieran to turn into a zombie and attack humans, thus alerting the villagers. In desperation, Kieran ran into the cemetery, attempting to tie himself to the iron fence with wire. Nearby, Jem heard the noise and used her revolver to push back the followers. But when she walked into the cemetery and saw Kieran, who had turned into a zombie, slowly standing up, he was still trying to fight off his bloodthirsty instincts. At this moment, Steve walked up, trying to awaken Kieran's consciousness with his words. Seeing this, Jem hastily aimed her gun at Kieran. Then, the 12 o'clock bell rang, and Simon suddenly rushed out from not far away. As a gunshot sounded, Maxine in the distance showed a relieved smile. She knelt in front of a grave praying, but what she expected didn't happen. Just then, Maxine saw Amy and Philip appearing in the distance. Amy, bringing Philip to her family's grave, wanted to share her joy with her family. Perhaps as a mercy from heaven, Amy suddenly felt her heart beating again. But before they could even celebrate,
Amy Dyer, you are the first and the last.
Maxine, covered in blood, appeared at the gathering. It turned out she had been a resident of Rorton village until her brother tragically died here. Since hearing Auntie mention a second resurrection, she had planned to resurrect her brother. That night, Sandra saw the first resurrected deceased was Amy. Maxine intended to use Simon to achieve her goal, but after the gunshot, nothing happened as expected. Then she saw Amy reappear, so Maxine decided to take matters into her own hands. But her brother still did not resurrect. Maxine begged the villagers to help her kill all the PDS in the village, so her brother could be resurrected. After speaking, Maxine, holding scissors, charged at the PDS present, but Dean appeared and stunned her with a taser. At this time, Simon and Kieran were waiting for a checkup at the clinic. It turned out that Simon had taken the bullet for Kieran at that moment, choosing Kieran over his faith and true love. Just then, Philip rushed in holding Amy, covered in blood, her pupils returning to human appearance. Amy became a real human. However, upon hearing the doctor's final verdict, it seemed as though heaven played a cruel joke, letting the dead come to life only to die again, making the sorrowful happy only to break them again. Later, a funeral was held for the girl who loved to laugh, with a chosen phrase on her coffin lid: "No matter what, I firmly believe in this truth. The greater the sorrow, the more genuine it is. Better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." Until late into the night, Philip reluctantly left Amy. However,